Hello, you're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. And today we're in Jerusalem, talking to a Messianic Jewish pastor called Ofer Amitai, who, as well as running a congregation, also leads a prayer movement which guides and encourages people to pray for God's will to be done both in Israel and the nations of the world. At a time when many would say the focus of the Gentile Christian world is looking at Israel, albeit often with strong opinions, I asked Ofer what he would say to people listening to this program who want to understand why Israel and the Jewish people are important from a biblical point of view, but who at the same time cannot see or understand their role in what is happening.
First of all, I'd like to say, don't be confused. We don't have to be confused, not by the political world, not by our perceptions of what's going on, not by what we're being necessarily fed by the media, but in the period of time we're living in, I believe that our greatest need is to be anchored in the Word of God. Understand it, not pieces of it, but all of it. We must become people of the Word again. And when I say people of the Word, I don't mean just study it intellectually, but through prayer and study and depth. Understand God and His heart and what He is doing. So, and when we come to Israel, and I want to approach it first from the Word of God, and obviously one of the places where the role of Gentiles and why is clearly marked in Romans 11, for instance, that there Paul lays a foundation for exactly what you're asking. And it's not, to me, just a question of proving something, but of seeing what he actually said. And besides the point, and I won't get into it so much, of showing that God has not cast away His people, the background of it is the fact that He said to them, look, it's the time of the Gentiles. God has set the nation aside, not put her away, but set her aside for a time in which He will bring the gospel to the Gentile world. And it actually unfolds there in a very heartbreaking way, because he said, Paul actually speaks of God blinding us. And when I speak about it, sometimes I ask people, would you blind one of your children for another? But when we read it with opinions, then we don't see the heart of God, and that's too bad. And Paul is an apostle to the Gentiles. He loves them. He laid down his life for them as a Jew because he understood this. And he was misunderstood by his own people much, even by the believers. And yet he persisted in it, and thank God for that, because half of the new covenant that we have, the scriptures, are because of his efforts, and thank God. So God had set the Jews aside for a season as part of His unfolding plan to complete it. Now we're living on the other side of it, which is He has begun to work with the Jewish nation again. One, bringing her physically back, and even have begun to bring her spiritually back. This is why you're talking to me, right? Because I'm just one of many who God has brought back to Himself. And so now the Gentile role in it is significant. And what Paul is actually doing there, I think it's amazing. He said, look, actually, their restoration will be of tremendous benefit. And instead of just using the word Gentiles, I would say the church. It will bring her back to life. Whatever that means, I won't even go there. But it'll bring her back to life. And let me even put it this way only, because life is God himself. At least I can say that the church will find herself in God again, in the full sense. And there may be some people who don't like what I say because they say, well, we never left him. But actually the Jews said that too, and he never left us. But that's not my argument here. But and he shows her that actually the fullness of what the church is hoping for, that he wrote about to the Colossians, to the Galatians, in Corinthians, are wrapped up in the completing of his plan and the fulfillment of it as he turns again to the Jewish people and fulfills his plan for them. And out of that comes several things. One, obviously, is prayer and faith. Prayer is a tremendously wonderful thing and very central, but very neglected, even though we have a proliferation of prayer movements. But it's not about numbers or activity. It's about faith. It's about trust. It's about actually understanding God's heart and mind to pray it and to touch him for what he wants. So that's her place. Another thing is, he said, through your mercy they shall obtain mercy. There is, to make it non-specific, but to make it at least what I believe it is, I would have to say somehow the connection of the church to the nation and to the body, of course, and to what God is doing should be the love of God in Messiah, such as the church has received. He said, through your mercy they shall obtain mercy, as much as you have obtained mercy, so they shall obtain mercy through you. So I think that those two kind of put together both the heart attitude and the activity of the church towards Israel. And without getting into, what if we don't agree with everything Israel does? That's not the point here in Romans. The point here in Romans is, do you see what God has said he would do? Do you understand what his plan is, and would you cooperate with it? Those are the three questions that need to be asked. And the challenge is, he puts it very directly, don't boast. Don't think you're the ones that replaced them. I mean, it's all there, and it's a wonderful thing.
You've talked about prayer and you've talked about politics, and clearly politics does muddy the waters and causes us perhaps not to understand fully what the heart of God is. So if I was to ask you, Ofer, at this time, what are some of the key prayer points that you would put before the church and the nations for what God is doing in Israel and how they can understand and get behind it? What would you say?
Okay. Well, to those who have never prayed before, I could turn them to Ezekiel 36, but the main point of Ezekiel 36 is God's glory. God's glory. And so the first point should be actually what the first point in the Lord's Prayer is. Hallowed be thy name. Let thy glory shine forth. That's what you're saying. Magnify, sanctify your name. How? By doing your will on the earth as it is done in heaven, and so forth. And God there actually, it's not an easy thing for an Israeli or a Jewish believer to read when God says, I want you to know that you have profaned my name. And he repeats it again and again. And it is not an easy thing to read. It's like somebody putting you against the wall and saying to you, you have shamed me. And most believers say, okay, I'm sorry. And they say, no, you have shamed me, Israel. You have profaned my name. When the Gentile nations saw you out of the land, it brought great embarrassment on my name. So that's the heart of Ezekiel 36 and of the restoration of Israel. And then God says, and so I'm going to tell you now, he says, how I'm going to sanctify my name. And the prayer list that is there is all for the glory of God. That's why it must be made clear. It's not about us. And he says, the first thing he says is, I'll bring you back to the land. Second thing he says is, I will cleanse you from all your filthiness. Third thing is, I will pour my spirit upon you. Fourth thing is, I'll give you a new heart. And then the declaration, you will be my people, I will be your God. So that's something the church needs to pray. And it's not about politics. It's about the glory of God. Where politics have disturbed this is they say, but it's not fair. They should not be there, and on in replacement theology, which is beyond the scope of this program. But the number one issue is, will you pray for the glory of God? Will you pray it the way God showed us to pray it, regardless of your opinions? And I believe that after you pray it for a while this way, God can reveal things to you and sort things out. Again, I have to say, it's not about politics, it's about praying. The church has stopped praying because it possibly doesn't pray much anyway, but it won't pray for something it feels is not righteous. It's a big mistake.
Ofer Amitai, a Messianic Jewish pastor, sharing his understanding of the role Gentile Christians can play in what is currently happening in Israel and the wider Middle East. And we'll hear more from Ofer on next week's program. You're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. And the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please either visit our website, olivetreefund.org, or write to me, Julia Fisher, at the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, PO Box 850, Horsham, RH12 9GA in the UK. Thank you for your company today. Do join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.